Harrisons spent the summer at an old cottage they had inherited from their grandfather. The house stood in a secluded area, surrounded by dense forest. The first few days passed quietly. The children played on the property. The parents did minor repairs, enjoying the silence away from the city. One day, the youngest son, Ben, ran across a strange object while running around the yard. It was an old stone well, almost completely overgrown with moss. Its lid was made of rusty iron covered with a thick layer of dirt. He sat on the edge of his place, considering his options. "Dad, look what I found," Ben shouted, pointing to the find. The father came closer, looking at the well appraisingly. "It's weird, I didn't even know it was here," he muttered, running his hand over the cold metal of the lid. "It looks like it hasn't been used for decades." He turned his back on her. They decided not to touch it. The lid looked secure, and the well itself was too deep to look into. However, on the very first night, the family began to notice strange things. After everyone had gone to bed, faint sounds began to come from behind the house. They were barely distinguishable, like whispers washed out by the night air. Sarah, the mother of the family, got up to look out the window, but saw nothing. The moon illuminated the yard. The well stood in place, motionless and silent. But the next night, the sounds grew louder. Now they were not just whispers, but something more, piercing screams that echoed across the property. As if from the depths of the well, someone was calling for help. On the third night, the sounds became especially distinct. The family gathered in the living room, trying to convince themselves that it was just the wind or their imagination. But when a child's voice was heard calling for help, no one could pretend that nothing was happening. "And help, please." The voice, weak and trembling, came from the direction of the well. Ben pressed himself into the sofa, frightened. "Mom, is that a child?" he asked, squeezing her hand. "That's impossible, Jack," the father answered sharply. "There can't be anyone there. The well has long been abandoned." But Sarah stood up, trembling. "If it's true, if someone is stuck there." Her voice trembled, but her determination was strong. Jack, taking the lantern, went out into the yard, followed by Sarah. Ben remained in the house, watching through the window. The well looked the same as before, but the child's voice was even clearer now. "Please, help!" The voice sounded as if the child was on the verge of crying. Jack shone the flashlight on the lid. It looked massive, but not as heavy as it seemed. "Okay," he muttered, trying to hide his fear. "Let's open it and see." Sarah helped him. They took hold of the rusty handle of the lid and began to lift it with difficulty. The metal creaked in protest, making a deafening sound. When the lid finally opened, a gust of icy air burst out of the well, so strong that it took their breath away. Along with it, an ominous whisper poured out, instantly enveloping them. "Someone there?" Jack shouted, shining the flashlight into the black depths. Sarah tried to look inside, but saw nothing but absolute darkness. Suddenly, the child's voice repeated itself. "Is everything going to be all right? You're here, at last." But there was something wrong with it now. The voice was deep, trembling, as if it wasn't the child speaking, but something else trying to imitate it. Before they could react, a low, roaring sound came from deep within the well, and an invisible force burst forth. It was like a whirlwind, cold and heavy, knocking them off their feet. "Witness this!" exclaimed Dante. Jack felt something slide down his arm, as if it were fingers, but they were cold as ice. Sarah screamed as the air around her began to vibrate, and a thick shadow that was impossible to make out stretched out of the well. Jack jumped up, grabbed Sarah's hand, and pulled her back toward the house. They slammed the door shut, but the sounds from outside continued. The well was no longer silent. Now, dozens of voices were coming from it, whispering, shouting, laughing. The silence in the house was deafening. Jack and Sarah sat by the door, breathing heavily, and outside the window there were sounds that should not exist: choral whispers, shrill screams, and something like inhuman laughter. "He is not a child," Jack muttered, holding his head. Sarah, shaking, hugged Ben, who was silent, not taking his eyes off the window. "What is it then?" Her voice was full of panic. It's something ancient, not human," Jack answered, remembering how the shadows burst out of the well. "I don't know what it is, but it was locked there for a reason." On the table lay an old map of the site that Jack had found a few days ago among his grandfather's things. He grabbed it, hoping to find at least some kind of clue. Flipping through the pages, he came across notes left in pencil. "Don't open the well. Blood mound. If it gets out, there's no escape." "Bloodbound?" Sarah muttered, glancing at the map. "Is it us?" Suddenly, there was a knocking sound behind them. Slow, dull, like someone was banging on the wall from the outside. "Do you hear that?" Ben whispered. The knocking grew louder, as if the thing outside was starting to circle the house, hitting every wall. The whispers from outside the window grew louder, penetrating inside, as if the air itself was talking. "You can't leave," dozens of voices whispered at once. Sarah grabbed Ben and held him close. "We have to go," she cried. "Did you see it move?" Jack was leaping through the map furiously. "It's not just there, it's here now, tied to us." "It wouldn't?" And suddenly he remembered. His grandfather had said that the well had been sealed for generations. He didn't know why, but now everything became clear. The well was not ordinary. It was holding something that couldn't be released. "We released it, and now it will haunt us." Jack exhaled, realizing all the hopelessness. Whispers penetrated the walls of the house. Voices sounded from everywhere, repeating their names, telling their thoughts, teasing them with fears. "You won't leave." The child's voice was heard, now inside the room. Jack realized that the well was no longer locked, and the ancient power, languishing in the depths for centuries, was now free and made them its target. With each passing day, they would hear its whispers closer, see the shadows more clearly. Now this was part of their lives, or rather, they became part of it.